Can music stop a pandemic? Hello everybody, my name is Patricia Mora, and I want to explore how to use music in order to treat brain diseases. 8 years ago, my grandfather was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I was witness of how a disease is able to turn off a person without any chance of a cure. Just to put everybody under context, there is around 36 million cases of neurodegenerative diseases, what today I will call brain diseases in order to make it easier, around the world, which is actually comparable with the population of my country, Spain. For example, more in concrete, let's say, there is around 8.5 million cases of Parkinson's disease, which is actually comparable with the population of Israel. What is more surprising is that the number of cases just keep rising, since the main risk factor of these diseases is age, and the life expectancy keep increasing. Therefore, every 65 seconds, there is a new case of Alzheimer's. Every 10 minutes, there is a new case diagnosed of Parkinson's disease, and every 90 minutes, a new person is suffering ALS or Huntington disease. This actually will mean that by the end of my talk, around 15 to 20 new people will be diagnosed with brain diseases. How scary is that? In 20 to 30 years from now, millions of people will be suffering of these diseases without a chance of a cure. How is it possible that by 2022, we don't have a possible cure for these diseases? A possible reason is the high protection that the brain has. In this case, it's actually so-called blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is actually acting as a physical barrier itself. How? Covering all the blood vessels that are penetrating inside the brain. Its main role, it will be to protect against microorganisms such as bacteria or even molecules such as different toxins. However, this protection can also prevent different drugs penetration, which will actually complicate the treatment of brain diseases, right? Let's say that the blood-brain barrier will be like a security guard of a nightclub, that he will decide if you are allowed or not to get into the club and enjoy the night. This huge challenge called my curiosity or my attention, and I decided to dig inside this field in order to try to find possible options or possible solutions to treat these challenging diseases. As my background in drug delivery, I've been working for my 10 last years in the design of nanoparticles. But what is a nanoparticle? It's actually a really small carrier where in its inside I can put drugs. But when I say really small, how small it is? If you will take one of your hairs, the thickness of it is around 100 microns. If you will divide it in half for over 100,000 times, you will get to a size of a nanometer. So in this scale is the scale of small that I am working on. Then with the design of these nanoparticles, actually they are quite interesting, specifically for brain diseases. And why? Because nowadays, possible treatments have been designed to try to cure these diseases, as it was talked before, DNA or RNA, like nucleic acid-based treatments, or also proteins or new small molecules, but that the main problem of them is that they cannot cross this blood-brain barrier, and therefore they cannot reach the brain. For that specifically, the design of these nanoparticles that can actually encapsulate in their inside and bring it to the brain can be really interesting. In that way, if my nanoparticles, let's say, they are not well disguised, let's say when you arrive to this nightclub, you are not properly dressed, right? Most probably, the security guard will tell you, I'm sorry, you are kicked out of here, you cannot pass. However, imagine that this security guard is a huge fan of something like donuts. So wouldn't make it way easier if you arrive to this security guard with a box of delicious donuts. Let me tell you, I'm sure he will finally open the door and tell you, of course, you are welcome to enjoy the night. The same way, I can disguise my nanoparticles in order to make them easier to get into the blood, like the brain finally, and cross this blood-brain barrier. Therefore, I will load in the inside of my particles the specific drug that I want to transport, And then by modifying their surface with different molecules, I can finally penetrate the brain. But which molecule to choose specifically for the brain, right? The main fuel of energy of the brain is glucose, which is actually commonly known as sugar. So what if I will cover my particles with sugar? I'm sure that the brain will be kind of glad to receive these nanoparticles with sugar. However, this has been done, and actually we're working on it on the lab, but the amount of particles that just by this strategy have been able to reach the brain is still not enough. Not enough to bring the amount of drug able to treat the disease. Therefore, a new question came to my mind. What can I do in order to increase this amount of particles inside the brain? How can I do that these glucose nanoparticles will arrive in a higher manner to the brain? When big questions come to my mind, I always come back to my grandfather, since he has been always a source of inspiration for me. Now, as I told you, he's suffering Alzheimer, and let's say that he's not anymore with us. But there is only one thing that is actually making something inside him, and it's bringing kind of a glimpse of light in his eyes. And this is music. Somehow, music has the power to turn on something inside his brain. Therefore, I asked myself, what is exactly music doing inside the brain of my grandfather? And how can I take advantage of it in order to improve brain diseases treatments? Music exposure has been proved to increase brain activity, which is actually known as the Mozart effect. This increased brain activity is actually new neuronal connections that's being made. And a neuronal connection will require energy, right? And as I mentioned before, the main source of energy in the brain is glucose. Therefore, an increased brain activity is supposed to bring an increased glucose demand by the brain. Therefore, let's say if I will use music in order to induce this brain activity and make, let's say, our brain more hungry, and the only source of food that I'm giving him is my nanoparticles modified with glucose, wouldn't the particles go in a higher manner to the brain? Therefore, this is specifically what I am going to study. I will study the different music conditions regarding either frequency, rhythm, or the beats per minute of my music, as well as intensity or the loudness of it, and how these conditions will affect the brain activity. How I will measure the brain activity, either via functional magnetic resonance, that it's actually a technique that is able to show which parts of the brain have been activated and in which amount, as well as electroencephalogram, that by electrical wavelengths, we will be able to evaluate how active is the brain in a specific moment. Once I will evaluate the brain activity, I will correlate it to the glucose demand of the brain. For that, I will use PET-CT. That is a technique that by modifying glucose with a radioactive molecule, I am able to find or follow where the glucose is going and how much glucose is arriving to the brain. Therefore, when I will finally optimize which is the specific music that increase in the highest manner the brain, and therefore in the highest manner the uptake of glucose by the brain, I will use this specific music. I will expose my animals to this specific music, and I will evaluate the uptake of my glucose-modified particles. How I will do it? Either by modifying with a fluorophore, making my nanoparticles fluorescent and myself being able to follow them around the body, or loading my particles with a specific metal that afterwards I will be able to quantify how much of this metal arrived to a specific organ. In this way, I will be able to get one step closer to my dream medicine. That is where science and art work together in order to improve human health. I'm just missing to say thank you, everybody, for listening to me and the Azrieli Foundation for letting me present my work. And of course, I will be glad to answer any question or suggestion. Thank you very much.
Hi, Patty. Excellent talk. Thank you. I have two questions. The first question, when you described the problem at the beginning is there's not enough uptake of the medicine. By how much? I mean, how much do you need to increase the uptake in order to have a 100% uptake? That's my first question. And the second is, in the last part of your talk, you talked about adding a metal to the medicine, and then you can track it. But you mentioned organs. Is it in the body or also in the brain?
Okay, so let's start maybe for your first question, that is related of how much uptake should I consider, let's say, like beneficial, right? So the thing is that nowadays, since the brain, like treatments, let's say the drugs arrive into the brain is so short, any benefit will be better. And so we are talking on the nanoparticles that I'm working just with glucose. The arrival is even like less than 0.1% of the dosage. So an increase in even 5 times, it would be huge. Even if you hear 0.5% is nothing, but it will be five times higher of what we're getting nowadays. So that first of all. And then second, regarding with the metal, I'm talking about organs, yes. The metal itself, I can either load it inside the particle or even conjugate it to it. And then by injecting my nanoparticles in the circulatory system of the mice, they will be accumulated in different organs. And then what I just do, I just harvest the organs, and I just analyze a specific amount of metal that I can find. It should be a metal that is not present in the blood. For example, I wouldn't be able to use iron. I'm using gadolinium, that is a metal that you won't find in our body. So it's...
Just a quick follow-up. So you cannot use any imaging techniques to see the metal?
So if, for example, I will use gold, or I would use also imaging.
Without harvesting the organs, I mean, you just put the mice, you put them to sleep,
yes,
temporarily, and then you do the imaging. You can see where are the metal.
So also with the fluorophore, I can just stain the nanoparticles with a fluorophore. The thing is that it just gives me the following up of it. But if I want to quantify exactly how many particles arrive, by the metal I can actually have a number and quantify exactly how many particles arrive to the target organ, let's say.
Thank you, Patricia. That was really cool. I have like 2 questions. Maybe I'll see everyone wants to ask something. I'll ask just the first one, and then we'll see. So I'm thinking about how transferable whatever you find in animals is to humans, and even if you go to humans, how transferable it is in terms of the music determinants that you find between each person. Because I'm thinking this is a personal thing, right? Like I'm thinking that the music that helps your grandfather has nothing on me, and even
Absolutely.
the music that I like, I don't like maybe to hear it in a hospital setting, as I like to hear it in my bed. So this transferability of the actual capacity of music to make it more glucose hungry, how transferable to a clinical setting or between people or animals and people you think it is? Oh. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your question. Really interesting, actually. As I see it, it's even, for myself at least, even more interesting because it's kind of personalized medicine. It's true that it's proved that the songs that you are more connected with emotionally, they're activated even more areas of your brain, which it can actually be related as, again, with a higher glucose demand. So it's true that the treatment itself will require a pre-evaluation of what is specifically the song that is triggering this brain activity in the highest manner. In my case, because I am testing it in mice, most probably the songs that I will use for them, it won't be the same towards the human. I just want to evaluate if there is really a connection with the music activating the brain, with the glucose demand and uptake of particles. But yes, of course, like in a really long term, I envision it like a personalized medicine and stuff. But thank you very much.
I actually had the same question, but your answer made me think of another one. What evidence is there that music affects a mouse brain the same way it affects a human brain? Like, why would music necessarily do anything to a mouse?
Okay, so actually this was one of my first questions when I started like digging into this. And I found this Mozart effect that I was talking about. And I was surprised, like, how it's possible that Mozart is doing something in a mouse. Because if I think it for a human, it makes a lot of sense that music, it's affecting us in a, like, really complex way. But I need a model to evaluate it. So I was, like, digging into how I can induce brain activity in mice. And what it surprised me is that actually in literature, it's shown that specific songs of Mozart are improving or increasing the brain activity of the mice. It's true that still there is not a like really deep evaluation of how this increase of brain activity is related with an increase of glucose demand, but in the end we're in research, so it's something that I am expecting to get new answers. So I hope next time I will be able to give you more answers about it. But yes, of course, like the relation between animals and like mice and humans, it's a bit different, but again, it's like I need a model. So.
Thank you, that was wonderful. I have a question about the specificity of music, perhaps. So, listening to your talk, I'm sure that my brain needed a lot of glucose in a way, right? Because it was so stimulating and interesting. At the same time, I'm not sure that this is true for all of us, but at the same time, if we were to have a group of individuals with neurodegenerative diseases in the room, it wouldn't work on them, right? No. However, on the other hand, it seems that there's something specific in music that seems to be working and increasing brain activity and glucose consumption, even in individuals that have advanced neurodegenerative disease. What is it about music that seems to have this effect, rather than any other stimulating activities that we can think about?
So thank you very much for your question. Actually, it's something that when I started to dig into this, like all this field of music therapy or stuff, I was also really surprised that the music itself, it's doing something special. It's triggering specific parts of the brain that somehow, even though you're suffering from like neurodegenerative diseases, the memory related with the music, it's like deeper than your like regular memory. So for example, in the case of my grandfather, it's really amazing how to see that he's not able to recognize me as a like granddaughter, but he's able to remember songs that he was singing in the army, for example. And so actually this is why I decided to dig in this. I don't really have an answer because I think there is even not yet a real answer of what is exactly music doing and how it's possible that it's like working this way. So again, I hope that like in the near future, I will be able to answer this and like assess it in a better way. But it's true that it's really surprising and really like amazing in that way. Thank you very much.
So Patricia, thank you very much for that. Really, I enjoyed it. Besides music, which all the questions that they have asked, I also had them. I wanted to ask you how you are going to deliver those nanoparticles, because I know that to reach blood-brain barrier, some people use intranasal delivery, others do injections in the CSF. So what is the most efficient way for you to deliver those nanoparticles?
Okay, so let's say we're talking about the route of administration of the particles itself. So nowadays, I'm working in intranasal and IV injection. It's true that, for example, intranasal, it has like an easier way because it's not passing specifically through the same ways against the blood-brain barrier. Actually, it doesn't pass through blood-brain barrier. So in this specific project, my aim is to get via IV. Because like since my challenge is to cross the blood-brain barrier and do things kind of like easier, so I am aiming to reach through the like blood, like regular circulatory system to reach to the brain. But for example, intranasal nowadays is also like hitting really strong because the blood-brain barrier is not such a barrier through that route. So I am also taking into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you very much.